Today I am once again going to dive into a slightly controversial topic for some it's not, because today I'll talk about a network isolator. So you can isolate your home network from your hi-fi system and possibly, hopefully, achieve slightly better sonics by doing that. So if you already know that zeros are zeros, ones are ones, data will get from one end to the other one, and that's all there is to it, you will write this off as an audiophile snake oil. But then you probably don't realize some of the finer intricacies of electrical circuits, that even digital signal is carried by electricity, and electricity can be less or more clean. And basically every signal, that being analog or digital, is prone to some sort of interferences. May that be electromagnetic, radio frequency, or even just reflections that are happening inside of the cable because of the impedance mismatch between the source sending the signal and the device receiving that signal. And digital signal is not immune to all of that, just like the analog. But somebody once told, the shallower your knowledge is, the deeper your convictions are. So if you need to go all tribal about this topic with your limited knowledge, by all means do it. But if you're rude or condescending in any way, even if it's covert and you think you're smart, I'll delete your comments. But moving on, what we have here today is a network optical isolator, and it's called Effe-01. I think it's Effe, it's E-F-F-E. Here in my country, and I suppose Spanish speakers, we would just call it Effe. But given that this device is coming from the United Kingdom, and that I'm trying to go through intricacies of reading English language, I'll just try Effe. It sounds nice at least. So Effe-01 is a network isolator. And in the back you have a power supply inlet. The power supply is located inside. And there is one Ethernet port that is input, the other Ethernet port that is the output. And that's it. In the front there is one LED that lights blue when the device is turned on. The whole device is made of aluminum. And that's it. Nothing too hi-fi fancy or sexy. And it's a similar story inside, where we have a switching power supply. I know that big linear power supplies are very sexy in hi-fi world, but there are many knowledgeable people claiming that digital equipment working with digital signals actually prefer fast and high-quality switching power supplies. So I never write anything off just because it has a switching power supply and it should be a hi-fi grade piece of gear. So that said, aside from the power supply, we have one receiver that turns your network signal from electronic one to the optical one. It sends information via optical cable to another receiver that converts it back from optical to electronic and then to the output towards your hi-fi system. What this means is that there is a cut in electronic circuitry, and there is a gap which cannot be passed electronically because optical connection is in between, meaning that no electronic noise can pass from one side to the other one. This is also called galvanic isolation, by the way. This way, if there was any undesirable noise carried in the electrical signal going from your Wi-Fi router through the Ethernet cable and connecting to your hi-fi, that's cut, that's interrupted and cleaned out. Now the electricity for that signal is provided from this device. And just one thing left to mention before we go to does it actually work is the pricing. It's 398, basically 400 British pounds, which equates to something around 500 US dollars. It's not cheap, it's not too expensive compared to most audiophile switches either. It's in line with some switches that I have been personally tested in the last few years. So let's talk about does it actually work and what can you expect from it. Because network equipment is not directly creating or amplifying the sound, I will not talk about the sound of this isolator. I don't think it can be described that way. I will immediately go to comparing what I've heard when I was changing between connecting my Volumio Motivo streamer directly to my Wi-Fi router using Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi connection wirelessly, and what changed if I connected it using this optical isolator instead. And I'll start with this. In my own system and with my own home network, the worst possible case that I can do is use a cable to connect my Wi-Fi router that is provided by my internet provider. I didn't buy that router, I have to use it. And then I connect it physically with a cable with my Volumio Motivo digital audio streamer. That is the base for any further comparison. And when I disconnect that physical cable and start using Wi-Fi, like wireless connection on Volumio Motivo, I actually do notice slight increase in sound fidelity in terms of a bit more detailed and precise sound. The difference is really small, but Wi-Fi receiver and its isolation from the rest of the device in Volumio Motivo is done well enough so it's a lesser evil compared to physically connecting that same streamer to that noisy Wi-Fi router. Just breaking that physical connection and using Wi-Fi instead brings slightly better clarity and slightly less muddiness in the bass and the mid-bass. Then, moving to Effe-01 here, I do notice that clarity increases even more. It's not providing a leaner or sharper sound, but instead I just feel that a bit of fattiness and some sort of muddiness that you do not really notice without any sort of isolation. But once you add this, you do notice that a bit of fat and muddiness existed that was creeping in with notes and with fine details and making them slightly bolder, slightly shoutier in a way that you don't really notice until you compare it to something that takes a bit of that fattiness and muddiness away. And for example, it was interesting for me that I could listen to any sort of song. It doesn't have to be some fancy audiophile recording with some spectacular atmospheric detail. For example, the first evening when I did that comparison, I was listening to some old bossa nova recordings, something like this for example, and what I noticed is that the inner tone texture of a vocal is pronounced a bit more with this isolator. And then there are some parts when the singer starts singing energetically and the vocal becomes a bit bold and at times slightly reverberant and boomy. And when I listen with isolator, that boominess decreases slightly. The vocal, even when in these louder, more chesty passages, stays calmer and its inner texture is more obvious, and you never get to that slightly attacky boominess and reverberance and almost a bit too much of chestiness. But there is like a good, solid, controlled chestiness, and there is when it becomes slightly too thick and, as I said, almost boomy. And Effe here removed that. Everything sounded slightly more transparent but calmer at the same time. Then if I listen to several songs and I get used to this newly introduced just transparency and slightly better airiness and calmer, deeper background, less fattiness, less boominess, all of these are very subtle differences, but you get used to that. Then you connect your streamer directly to your router and immediately you hear a bit louder sound that is more boomy but less revealing. And you immediately want to decrease the volume just a bit because that added information, that added volume in tone is not constructive. It feels like something that is boldening the sound but also muddying it and making it a bit more cluttered and heavier, not in a good way. So to sum up these sonic impressions, what I noticed is that Effe-01 makes sound a bit cleaner, a bit more transparent, but not in a way that it emphasizes edges or sharpness. It doesn't do that at all. It just removes a bit of muddiness, fattiness, and haze to make tones more transparent. Finest small details and inner tone textures are both more obvious and easier to hear, and the overall sound feels a bit calmer and decluttered and less shouty. That said, it's time to compare it to some similar products. And if you follow my channel regularly, you maybe know that I already reviewed Gustard N18 Pro audiophile switch as well as LHY SW-8 before it. And both of these are roughly in the same price category as Effe-01 here. But they are not optical isolator, they're audiophile switches. They have one input and then several outputs. They do reclock the signal, they add higher quality power supplies, and they promise some sort of filtering and improvement of your signal too. Now, Gustard here makes a sound when you put it in your system. It makes it cleaner in a way that it makes edges more cleanly outlined and crisper. And everything feels clearer, but it also changes tonality slightly. Bassline becomes quicker and more precise, but a bit leaner too. With this one, you have to be careful that your system is not already on that cleaner and leaner side of things, because it does shift the tonality a little bit. It introduces its own sound signature imprint on your system. With Effe here, that doesn't happen. It just feels like it removes a bit of a fat and veil without actually changing tonality. And to me, results that Effe is achieving are slightly more refined. It brings more micro detailing and those micro textures from tones. The tones feel richer and more incisive in a way that Gustard here doesn't fully achieve. It's doing more of the cleaning your sound around the tones and around the edges. And in some systems that maybe sound a bit too fatty or muddy or unresolving, the effect that Gustard achieves may be more desirable. It might feel like it cleaned out your sound more. But Effe here works in a subtler, more refined way that I think will be preferable in better systems with less problems. And personally, in my current system, I do prefer what Effe is doing and the way it's doing it compared to Gustard here. Tonally speaking, it's much more similar to LHY SW-8 that I don't have currently with me, it's at my friend's. And that one did not change the tonality like Gustard. It also just slightly improved the overall clarity of your sound without changing the tonality. And Effe here is doing that same thing, but to my ears, just slightly better than LHY, bringing just a touch more micro detailing and inner tone texture than LHY does. And now the last burning question that will make you question any audiophile's sanity is what happens if you daisy chain these devices in series. So if you already have a good audiophile switch, but now you have add an optical isolator, so it goes like your Wi-Fi router, then your switch, then the optical isolator, what happens? I saw some people on the web claiming that the positive effect simply doubles. You have the positive effect of optical isolator and the positive effect of switch. They'll pile on top each other and you'll have an awesome sound. Well, in my experience, it doesn't happen like that really. So if I tried to use a switch first, then optical isolator second, closer to my hi-fi input, I noticed slight improvement. If we say that the change, that having a good switch introduced into your system is 100%, then the addition of the optical isolation adds maybe another 10% or something like that. But if I try the opposite way, so I first connect optical isolator, then after it I use audiophile switch, then what I actually noticed is some result that is tonally in between these two devices, but I actually preferred using optical isolator alone than having the switch added after it. That to my ears decreased this fine resolution and fine inner tone texturing that this optical isolator is bringing to the system. Having switch after it decreased it slightly. Now I had like 5-10% deduction from the overall improvement. So no, I do not agree that piling these isolation devices and daisy chaining them is always bringing all of the improvement from one device and just add it to another one and you have double the awesome. Result of combining them and mixing them in different ways is more like a child of a couple. It will have some characteristics of one parent, some of the other, but it will just not combine all of the positive traits or all the pretty things of both of its parents. It will just be a combination of the two. It might be slightly better, it might be slightly worse, but back to actual hi-fi, in my opinion, it's not worth doing it. So for me personally, it's simple. I tried several of these, I choose what suits my system and my taste the best, I use that one. No serial daisy chaining for me. It feels wrong in many different ways for me personally. If it doesn't for you, by all means, go crazy, go nuts. Chain 3 of them if you can draw any happiness from that. But my personal conclusion is that this optical isolator works nicely, and I don't want to repeat everything that I said in my previous network switch reviews, but I suggest that if you're new to this hobby, if you have budget or like a mid-range system, don't think about products like this just yet. Once you actually have a system that you feel is great and main components that you're really satisfied with and you're not looking to upgrade them like soon, then and only then, in my opinion, devices like this start to make sense, because they do bring subtle improvements, and if you are an audiophile maniac, you can appreciate that. And that will be all for today, guys. See you next time.